The moment Zachary Dalton pulled open the barn door that September morning in 1878, he knew something was different about the way the horses were acting. Their ears pricked forward, and heads turned toward the hayloft above. He stood perfectly still in the dusty shaft of early sunlight that cut through the barn, listening past the usual sounds of his ranch outside Piñon, New Mexico territory. What he heard made him reach instinctively for the rifle he had leaned against the doorframe, but then he caught himself. The sound was breathing, soft and exhausted, like someone had run until their lungs gave out. He climbed the wooden ladder slowly, each rung creaking under his weight, announcing his approach. When his head cleared the loft floor, he saw her. A woman lay curled in his hay, her dark blonde hair matted with sweat and dust, her dress torn at the hem and stained with the red dirt of the New Mexico desert. Her face was sunburned, her lips cracked and bleeding. She did not stir as he pulled himself up into the loft, and for a moment fear gripped him that she might be dead. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. Zachary knelt beside her, his weathered hands hesitating before he gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes flew open, wild and afraid, the color of desert sage in morning light. She tried to scramble backward, but her body would not cooperate, trembling with exhaustion. "Easy now," Zachary said, his voice low and steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "You are on my property, but you are safe here. When did you last have water?" The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. He could see her throat working, trying to form words. Without another word, Zachary climbed back down the ladder and strode quickly to the pump outside, filling a tin cup with cool well water. When he returned, she had managed to sit up, leaning heavily against a hay bale, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the morning. He handed her the cup and watched as she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. She drank 3 full cups before she finally spoke. "Zachary Dalton." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. He felt something shift in his chest at hearing his name from her lips. "That would be me." "And you are Delilah Sawyer." She met his eyes directly, and he saw steel beneath the exhaustion. "I walked 50 miles to find you." Zachary sat back on his heels, studying her. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, though the harsh sun had left its mark on her face. His own 30 years had been kind to him, keeping him strong and capable, but he knew the desert was less forgiving to those who traveled through it unprepared. 50 miles, he repeated. "From where?" "Socorro. I started walking 3 days ago." "Socorro." Zachary stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the hayloft. "That is closer to 70 miles, and you walked it. In this heat, woman, you could have died." "I know." Delilah's hands were shaking around the empty cup. "But I had to find you. My brother, Thomas Sawyer, he wrote to me about you before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should find Zachary Dalton in Piñon. Said you were the only man he trusted." The name hit Zachary like a physical blow. Thomas Sawyer. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in 6 months, not since the mining accident that had taken his friend's life along with 3 other men. They had worked together on the silver claims up in the mountains, and Thomas had saved Zachary's life when a tunnel collapsed 2 years back. Zachary had tried to return the favor, tried to warn Thomas that the mine was getting too dangerous, but Thomas had needed the money. "Thomas was a good man," Zachary said quietly. "The best friend I ever had. I am sorry for your loss." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "He was all I had. Our parents died of fever when I was 16, and Thomas took care of me. Worked himself to death to make sure I had a roof over my head and food to eat. What happened? Why did you walk all this way?" Delilah took a shuddering breath. The man Thomas worked for, Cyrus Webb, he came to our house 2 weeks after Thomas died. Said Thomas owed him money, gambling debts. I knew it was a lie. Thomas never gambled, not once in his life. But Webb said if I could not pay, then I would have to work it off. She looked down at her hands. He made it clear what kind of work he meant. Rage, hot and fierce, flared in Zachary's chest. He had heard of Cyrus Webb, a mine owner with a reputation for exploiting workers and worse. So you ran. I waited until dark and I walked. I had your address from Thomas's letters. I did not know what else to do or where else to go. She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. Thomas said you were honorable, that you would help if I ever needed it. Was he right? Zachary extended his hand to help her stand. Thomas was right about most things. Come on, let us get you into the house. You need food and rest, and those feet need tending. He noticed for the first time that her boots were worn through at the soles, her feet bleeding through makeshift bandages made from torn petticoat fabric. She tried to walk, but her legs buckled. Without thinking, Zachary swept her up into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, all bones and determination. I can walk, she protested weakly. Not on those feet, you cannot. He carried her across the dusty yard to his ranch house, a modest wooden structure he had built himself over the past 5 years. Inside, it was simple but clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 smaller bedrooms off to the side. He set her down gently in a chair at his kitchen table and went to work, heating water on the stove, gathering clean cloths and the tin of salve he used for cuts and burns. When he knelt before her to tend her feet, she tried to pull away. I can do it myself. You can barely sit upright, Zachary said matter-of-factly. Let me help. Delilah bit her lip but nodded. As he carefully removed her ruined boots and unwrapped the bloody bandages, he tried not to react to the raw, blistered flesh beneath. She had walked until her feet were hamburger meat, and yet she had kept going. This is going to hurt, he warned, and began cleaning the wounds as gently as he could. She did not cry out, though he saw her knuckles go white as she gripped the edge of the chair. When he had finished cleaning and wrapping both feet, he stood and went to prepare food, scrambling eggs and frying bacon, slicing thick pieces of bread from the loaf his neighbor Mrs. Chen had brought over 2 days ago. Delilah ate like she was starving, which she probably was. He let her eat in silence, watching the color slowly return to her face. When she had finished, he poured coffee for them both and sat across from her. You can stay here as long as you need, he said. I have a spare bedroom. It is not much, but it is clean and safe. I cannot impose on you like that. Thomas saved my life once. Consider this me paying that debt forward. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I need to know, is Webb going to come looking for you? Delilah's face went pale. I do not know. Maybe. He seemed determined. Then we need to be prepared. Pinyon is small, but the sheriff here is a good man. His name is Daniel Reeves, and he does not take kindly to men like Webb. I will speak with him tomorrow. I do not want to bring trouble to your door. Zachary met her eyes steadily. Trouble found my door the moment Thomas died. He was family to me, which makes you family too. We protect family here. Something in Delilah's expression softened, and for the first time since he found her, she smiled. It was small and tentative, but it transformed her face, hinting at the beauty beneath the exhaustion and sun damage. Thank you, she whispered. That night, after Delilah had fallen into an exhausted sleep in his spare room, Zachary sat on his front porch and looked out over his land. The ranch was not large, just 200 acres with enough grazing for his small herd of cattle and horses. It was enough to live on, enough to be proud of. He had built it from nothing after leaving behind a harder life, and he had sworn he would never let anyone take it from him. Now Thomas's sister was sleeping under his roof, and Zachary felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar yoke. But there was something else too, something he was not ready to name yet. The image of Delilah's face when she had smiled at him kept returning to his mind, and he found himself wondering what other expressions she might wear when she was not running for her life. He shook his head at himself. The woman had just escaped from God knows what kind of situation, and here he was thinking about her smile. She needed safety and security, not a rancher with foolish notions. Still, as he finally went inside to his own bed, he could not help but feel that his carefully ordered life had just been upended in a way he could not quite predict. The next morning, Zachary woke before dawn as he always did and went about his chores quietly, trying not to wake his guest. He fed the horses, milked his 2 cows, and collected eggs from the chicken coop. He was carrying the egg basket back to the house when he saw Delilah standing on the porch, wrapped in a blanket he had left for her, watching the sunrise paint the desert gold and red. "You should be resting," he called as he approached. "I have rested enough. I am not an invalid." But she winced as she shifted her weight, and he noticed she was standing mostly on the balls of her feet, trying to keep pressure off her heels. "Stubborn," he observed, climbing the porch steps. "Thomas mentioned that in his letters, said you were the most stubborn person he ever met. He talked about me." She sounded surprised and pleased. "Often. He was proud of you, said you could outwork any 2 men and never complained about it." Zachary set the basket down. "Also said you had a temper like a rattlesnake when riled." Delilah laughed, and the sound was like music. "That sounds like something Thomas would say. Did he tell you I can shoot too? He taught me when I was 14. He mentioned it. Said you once shot a coyote that was threatening his chickens from 100 yards away." 120, she corrected with a hint of pride. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. Finally, Zachary said, "I am going into town today to talk to the sheriff." "You should come with me. You will be safer if people know you are under my protection." "Will that not cause problems for you? Let me worry about that." He turned to look at her directly. "Delilah, I mean what I said. You are safe here. Whatever comes, we will face it together." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded. "All right, but I need to warn you, I am not very good at accepting charity." "Good thing this is not charity then. You can earn your keep helping around the ranch once your feet heal. I could use an extra pair of hands, and if you can shoot like Thomas said, even better. Coyotes have been troubling my calves." Relief and gratitude washed over her features. "I can do that. Thank you, Zachary." The way she said his name, with that soft sincerity, made something warm unfurl in his chest. He cleared his throat and picked up the egg basket. "Let me make breakfast, then we will head into town. Can you ride? Thomas taught me that too." Of course he did. An hour later they were riding into Pinyon together, Delilah mounted on Zachary's gentlest mare. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, the sheriff's office, and a handful of other businesses. But it was home, and Zachary knew every person they passed on the street. He helped Delilah dismount carefully in front of the sheriff's office, aware of the curious stares they were drawing. News traveled fast in small towns, and by nightfall everyone would know that Zachary Dalton had brought a woman to town. Sheriff Daniel Reeves was a man in his mid-50s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He looked up from his desk when they entered, his gaze moving from Zachary to Delilah and back again. "Zachary, miss," he stood, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "What brings you in?" Zachary let Delilah tell her story, watching Reeves's face grow increasingly grim as she described Cyrus Webb's threats and her desperate flight from Socorro. When she finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "I know Webb by reputation," he said. "Mining boss, runs a rough operation. He has been expanding his territory, buying up claims and forcing out anyone who will not sell. If what you are saying is true about these false debts, it would not be the first time he has used such tactics." "What can we do?" Zachary asked. "Legally?" "Not much unless he comes here and tries something. But I can send a wire to the sheriff in Socorro, let him know what happened, and I will make it known around Pinon that Miss Sawyer is under protection." He looked at Delilah. "You say your brother never gambled?" "Never. He was Methodist, took his faith seriously. He would not even play cards for matches." Reeves nodded slowly. "That matches what I knew of Thomas Sawyer. I met him a few times when he came through town, seemed like a decent man." He turned to Zachary. "You are taking responsibility for her." "I am." "People will talk. Let them talk. I am not doing anything improper." Reeves smiled slightly. "I know that, but for her reputation it might be wise to have a chaperone at the ranch. Mrs. Chen perhaps, or one of the church ladies." Delilah spoke up firmly. "I appreciate the concern, Sheriff, but my reputation is already compromised by the circumstances. I would rather be safe and talked about than proper and in danger." Both men looked at her in surprise, and Reeves's smile widened. "I can see why Thomas was proud of you, Miss Sawyer." "All right, I will do what I can from here. Zachary, you keep your eyes open. If Webb does come looking, I want to know about it immediately." They shook hands and left the office. Outside, Zachary noticed that Delilah was swaying slightly on her feet, the trip to town having exhausted her remaining strength. "One more stop," he said gently. "The general store. You need proper clothes and supplies. I have no money to pay for them. Consider it an advance on your wages." When she opened her mouth to protest, he held up a hand. "Delilah, you cannot work in a torn dress and ruined boots. Let me do this." She pressed her lips together but nodded. "Inside the store, Mrs. Martinez," the proprietor, took one look at Delilah and immediately began pulling items from shelves with the efficiency of someone who had been outfitting ranch hands for decades. She set Delilah up with 2 practical dresses, a split riding skirt, new boots, undergarments, and various other necessities, all while keeping up a steady stream of cheerful conversation that required little response. When they finally made it back to the ranch, Delilah was pale and trembling with exhaustion. Zachary helped her inside into her room where she collapsed on the bed fully clothed. "Rest," he ordered. "I will wake you for supper." She was asleep before he closed the door. Over the next 2 weeks, Zachary watched Delilah slowly come back to life. Her feet healed, the sunburn faded, and the hollow look in her eyes gradually filled with something brighter. She insisted on helping around the house as soon as she could walk without wincing, and Zachary found himself looking forward to coming in from his morning chores to find her cooking breakfast, humming softly to herself. They fell into an easy routine. He taught her about the ranch, showing her how he managed the cattle and horses, where the best grazing land was, how to read the signs of weather in the desert sky. She proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, never shying away from difficult tasks. And she could shoot just as well as Thomas had claimed. The first time she picked up a rifle and dropped a threatening coyote at 150 yards, Zachary let out a low whistle of appreciation. "Your brother did not exaggerate," he said. "Thomas never exaggerated about anything," Delilah replied, ejecting the spent cartridge with practiced ease. "It was one of his most annoying qualities." They were sitting on the porch that evening, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple when Delilah said quietly, I have been thinking about what I will do. Long term, I mean. I cannot stay here forever." Zachary felt his chest tighten. "Why not?" She looked at him in surprise. "Because this is your home, your life. I am just passing through." "What if I do not want you to be just passing through?" The words were out before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Delilah's breath caught. "Zachary." "I know it has only been 2 weeks," he said, the words coming faster now. "And I know you came here looking for safety, not anything else. But Delilah, these past 2 weeks have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember. This ranch feels more like a home with you in it. I look forward to morning because I know I will see you at the breakfast table. When I am out working, I find myself hurrying through tasks so I can get back to the house, back to you. I am not saying you have to feel the same way. I am just saying, if you want to stay, I want you to stay." She was quiet for so long he thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then she reached over and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "I thought it was just me," she whispered. "I thought I was being foolish, developing feelings so quickly. But Zachary, when I am with you, I feel safe in a way I have not felt since my parents died. More than safe. I feel seen. Like you understand me in a way no one else ever has." He turned to look at her, and the tenderness in her eyes made his heart race. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, they were both smiling. "So you will stay?" he asked. "I will stay." They sat together as the stars came out, hands clasped, both marveling at how quickly life could change. 3 weeks ago, Zachary had been alone on his ranch, content but not truly happy. 3 weeks ago, Delilah had been running for her life with no idea what the future held. Now they sat together, and the future suddenly seemed bright with possibility. But the peace was not to last. A week later, Zachary was in town getting supplies when Sheriff Reeves called him into the office with a grim expression. "Cyrus Webb was asking around Socorro about the Sawyer girl," Reeves said without preamble. "According to the wire I got back, he is claiming she stole money from him, $200. That is a lie. I know it. You know it. But Webb has influence in Socorro, and he is making noise about coming to collect what he is owed. I wanted you to be prepared." Zachary felt cold fury settle in his gut. If he comes here, he will not find an easy target. "I was hoping you would say that." "Look, Zachary, legally I cannot do much unless he actually breaks a law in my jurisdiction. But unofficially, if Webb shows up here, you have my full support in protecting what is yours." "She is not property," Zachary said sharply. "I know that. I meant your ranch, your land, your household. The girl is under your protection, which means she is under the law's protection too." Reeves paused. "There is another way to make this cleaner. If she were your wife, Webb would have no claim on her at all. A husband's rights supersede any alleged debt." Zachary stared at the sheriff. "Are you suggesting I marry her to keep her safe?" "I am suggesting that if you were planning to marry her anyway, now might be a strategic time to do it. But only if it is what you both want. I am not advocating a marriage of convenience here." As Zachary rode back to the ranch, Reeves's words echoed in his mind. He had been thinking about marriage, actually. Over the past 3 weeks, Delilah had become essential to him in a way he could not fully articulate. She made him laugh with her dry observations about ranch life. She challenged him when she thought he was wrong. She matched his passion with her own fierce determination. And when he kissed her, which he did as often as she would allow, the world narrowed to just the two of them. But marriage, after only 3 weeks. It seemed impossibly fast, even by frontier standards where courtships were often brief by necessity. Yet he knew, with a certainty that lived in his bones, that Delilah was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. The question was whether she felt the same way. He found her in the barn, brushing down his favorite stallion with long, practiced strokes. She looked up when he entered, and her smile faltered at his expression. "What is wrong?" He told her about the wire, about Webb's claims, about the sheriff's suggestion. He watched her face go through a series of emotions, fear and anger and something else he could not quite read. "So he wants to marry me off to avoid trouble," she said when he finished. "That is not what I want," Zachary said firmly. "Delilah, I would marry you tomorrow if you would have me, but not because of Cyrus Webb. I would marry you because when I imagine my future, you are in every single moment of it. I would marry you because I love you." The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud, though they had been dancing around it for days. "You love me," she repeated softly. "I do. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Delilah set down the brush and walked over to him, placing her hands on his chest. "My whole life I have had to be careful. Careful with money, careful with trust, careful with my heart. Thomas always told me I should be careful, that I could not afford to make mistakes. But you know what? I am tired of being careful. I love you too, Zachary Dalton. I think I started loving you the moment I woke up in your hayloft and you did not ask questions. You just gave me water." He kissed her then, deep and long, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of Webb, not because of convenience or protection. Marry me because we love each other and because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Pinyon, with Sheriff Reeves standing as witness and half the town cramming into the pews to watch. Delilah wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Martinez had somehow procured on short notice, and Zachary wore his best suit, the one he usually saved for funerals. He had never been more nervous in his life than when he stood at the altar waiting for her to walk down the aisle. But then there she was, and she was beautiful, and she was looking at him like he was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives. When the preacher finally said he could kiss his bride, Zachary did so with a joy that radiated through his entire body. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Chen had organized a small reception in the church hall, with cake and punch and a fiddler who played while couples danced. Zachary held Delilah close as they swayed to the music, overwhelmed by how much his life had changed in less than a month. "Happy," he murmured into her ear. "Happier than I thought possible," she replied. That night, back at the ranch, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed that was now their bed, Delilah traced patterns on his chest. "You think Webb will come?" she asked quietly. "I do not know. Maybe, but it does not matter now. You are my wife. He has no claim on you." He tilted her chin up so he could see her face. "Whatever comes, we face it together. I promise you that." She kissed him softly. "I believe you." Cyrus Webb arrived in Pinyon 2 weeks after the wedding. Zachary was working on repairing a section of fence when he saw the dust cloud on the road, 3 riders approaching at a steady pace. Something in his gut told him this was it. He rode hard back to the house, bursting through the door to find Delilah kneading bread dough. "Webb is here." 3 riders coming up the road. "Get the rifle and stay inside." To her credit, she did not panic. She simply wiped her hands on her apron, retrieved the Winchester from above the fireplace and checked that it was loaded. "What are you going to do?" "Talk to him." But if things go bad, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand, she nodded, her jaw set with determination. He kissed her quickly and went back outside, positioning himself on the porch where he had a clear view of the approaching riders and good cover if needed. His own rifle was within easy reach, propped against the porch rail. The three men reined in their horses at the edge of the yard. The man in front was well dressed for the territory, with a fancy vest and a gold watch chain glinting in the sun. He had the look of someone used to getting his way, with hard eyes and a cruel mouth. "Zachary Dalton," the man called. "That would be me, and you must be Cyrus Webb." "I am. I have come for the girl, Delilah Sawyer. She stole from me, and I mean to have her answer for it." "Her name is Delilah Dalton now," Zachary said evenly. "She is my wife, and she stole nothing from you." Webb's expression darkened. "Wife? That is convenient. Did she tell you about the $200 she took from my safe before she ran?" "She told me about your false claims and your threats. Thomas Sawyer never gambled a day in his life, which means there were no debts for his sister to inherit. You are trying to force a young woman into servitude, which makes you lower than a snake's belly." One of Webb's companions, a rough-looking man with a scar across his cheek, spat on the ground. "You calling the boss a liar?" "I am calling him a fraud and a coward who preys on grieving women," Zachary replied calmly. "Now you can turn around and ride back to Socorro, or we can involve the sheriff. Your choice." Webb leaned forward in his saddle. "I am not leaving without that girl or my money." "Then I guess we are at an impasse." Zachary heard the door open behind him and knew without looking that Delilah had stepped outside. "Because my wife is not going anywhere." "There she is," Webb said, his tone turning oily. "Delilah, sweetheart, this has all been a misunderstanding. You come back with me and we will forget all about the money. I will take good care of you." "I would rather die," Delilah said coldly, and Zachary heard the distinctive sound of her cocking the rifle. The scarred man reached for his gun, but he was slow, too slow. Delilah's shot rang out first, kicking up dust inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, throwing its rider to the ground. "Next one goes through flesh," Delilah said calmly. "Your choice." Webb's face went red with rage. "You think you can threaten me?" "I have friends in Socorro, powerful friends. I will have the law on you." "The law is already here." Sheriff Reeves rode into the yard from the opposite direction, his deputy beside him, both with rifles drawn. "And I have been listening to every word." "Webb, you are trespassing on private property and making threats. I suggest you turn around and leave." "I have a legitimate claim," Webb snarled. "Then take it up with a judge. But not in my territory and not against one of my citizens. Now get out before I decide to arrest you for harassment." For a long moment, it seemed like Webb might try something foolish. But then he pulled his horse around sharply, gesturing for his men to follow. The scarred man scrambled back onto his mount, glaring at Delilah with undisguised hatred. "This is not over," Webb called as they rode away. "Yeah, it is," Reeves called back. "And if I see you in Pinon again, I will shoot you myself." They watched until the three riders disappeared over the horizon. Only then did Zachary turn to find Delilah lowering the rifle with shaking hands. He took it from her gently and pulled her into his arms. "You did good," he murmured into her hair. "So good." "I have never been that scared in my life," she admitted. Reeves dismounted and came up onto the porch. "I had a feeling he might show up, so I have been keeping an eye on the road. Sorry I did not get here sooner." "You got here at exactly the right time," Zachary said. "Thank you, Daniel. That is what neighbors are for." The sheriff tipped his hat to Delilah. "Mrs. Dalton, you are a hell of a shot. Reminded me of my own wife, God rest her soul. She could shoot the wings off a fly at 50 paces." Delilah managed a shaky smile. "I will take that as a compliment." After Reeves left, Zachary and Delilah sat together on the porch steps, watching the sun move across the sky. The confrontation had shaken them both, but there was also a sense of relief, like a storm that had been brewing had finally broken and passed. "You think he will come back?" Delilah asked. "Honestly? No. Men like Webb are bullies. They only fight battles they think they can win. He knows now that you have protection, that people here will stand with us. It is not worth the risk for him." He squeezed her hand. "But if he does come back, we will be ready." "We," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that. Me too." The months that followed were the happiest of Zachary's life. He and Delilah settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked the ranch together, her skill with horses proving invaluable when it came time to break the new colts. She had a gentle touch but a firm hand, and the animals responded to her like she was speaking their language. The townspeople of Pinyon embraced Delilah as one of their own. Mrs. Chen taught her how to make the dumplings that had become famous throughout the territory, and Mrs. Martinez included her in the women's quilting circle that met every Tuesday. Delilah blossomed under their friendship, her natural reserve giving way to a warm sociability that made Zachary fall in love with her all over again every day. They heard through the grapevine that Cyrus Webb had sold his mining interests in Socorro and moved to California, chased out by a combination of bad investments and a workers' revolt that had nearly destroyed his operations. Zachary felt a grim satisfaction at the news. Justice did not always look the way you expected, but it had a way of arriving eventually. Winter came to New Mexico, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the desert in white. Zachary and Delilah spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the books they had collected, planning improvements for the ranch when spring arrived. They talked about expanding the herd, maybe building a bigger barn, perhaps starting a small orchard if they could get the irrigation right. It was on one of those quiet winter evenings that Delilah shared news that would change everything. "I am with child," she said simply, looking up from her mending. Zachary froze, the book he had been reading sliding from his hands. "You are certain?" "I have missed 2 courses now, and I have been sick in the mornings. Mrs. Chen recognized the signs before I did." She set down her sewing and looked at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I know we have not talked about children yet. Is this something you want?" He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "Want? Delilah, I want everything with you. A baby, a dozen babies if you will have them, a whole life full of noise and chaos and love." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy about this?" Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I am terrified and thrilled and so happy. Zachary, we are going to be parents." "We are going to be parents," he repeated, and then he was kissing her, and they were both laughing and crying at the same time. The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into her 2nd trimester, and the desert heat in summer made her swell and ache. But she bore it all with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, refusing to let her condition slow her down more than necessary. Zachary hovered and worried, driving her to distraction with his constant concern. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him exasperatedly one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this since the dawn of time. I can hang shirts. Let me help at least." She softened, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. "All right, you can help. But Zachary, you have to trust that I know my own limits. I just want you and the baby to be safe. We will be. We have each other, we have this community, we have everything we need." She took his hand and placed it on her swelling belly. "Feel that? That is our child. Strong and healthy, just like their parents. The baby kicked against his palm, and Zachary felt wonder wash over him. A child. His child. Theirs. Delilah went into labor on a scorching day in late July of 1879, almost a year to the day after she had first appeared in Zachary's hayloft. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Martinez took over the house with the calm efficiency of women who had delivered dozens of babies between them. They sent Zachary outside with instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. He paced the yard for hours, jumping at every sound from the house. The sun moved across the sky with agonizing slowness. Inside, he could hear Delilah's cries of pain, and it took everything in him not to burst through the door. This was a woman's domain, they had told him firmly, and he would only be in the way. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, thin and strong, Zachary felt his knees go weak with relief. Mrs. Chen appeared at the door a moment later, beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with good lungs. Come meet him." Zachary walked into the bedroom on shaking legs. Delilah lay propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with so much love it took his breath away. "Come see your son," she said softly. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peering out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Delilah's nose, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the color of storm clouds. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered. "You are perfect." "God, Delilah, I love you so much. I love you too." She shifted the baby into his arms, and Zachary held his son for the first time, marveling at how something so small could feel so monumental. "What should we name him?" he asked. Delilah did not hesitate. "Thomas, after my brother." "If that is all right with you." Zachary felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thomas Dalton. It is perfect." Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried unless he was hungry. He grew quickly, hitting all his milestones early, much to his parents' delight and exhaustion. The ranch became filled with the sounds of a child, crying and cooing and eventually laughing. Zachary found himself rushing through chores even faster now, eager to get back to the house where Delilah would be playing with Thomas on a blanket on the floor, singing to him or reading him stories he was too young to understand. The ranch prospered too. Word of Delilah's skill with horses spread, and people began bringing their difficult mounts to her for training. She had a gift for understanding what made each animal tick, and she worked with them patiently until they were calm and responsive. The extra income allowed them to finally build that bigger barn and expand the herd as they had planned. When Thomas was a year old, toddling around the house and getting into everything, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the morning sickness was even worse, but she was more experienced now and knew it would pass. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in the spring of 1881. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's dark eyes, and she was as fierce and determined as both of them combined. Life settled into a rhythm of hard work, deep love, and simple joys. Zachary would sometimes stop in the middle of a task and look around at everything they had built together, the ranch, the family, the life, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. He thought often of that morning when he had found Delilah in his hayloft, exhausted and desperate, and marveled at the journey they had taken together. One evening, when Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, the four of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas was telling an elaborate story about a horse he had ridden that day, a story that was mostly fantasy, while Rose tried to catch the fireflies that were beginning to emerge in the dusk. "You ever think about that day?" Delilah asked softly, leaning her head against Zachary's shoulder. "When I showed up here, all the time," he admitted, "I think about how different my life would be if you had not walked those 50 miles, how empty this ranch felt before you filled it with life and love. I was so scared," she said. "I had no idea if you would help me, if you would even believe me. All I had was Thomas's word that you were a good man." "Thomas was right," she smiled. "Yes, he was, and I like to think he is watching over us somehow, seeing what we have built. He would be proud." "He would be proud of you," Zachary corrected. "Of your strength, your courage, the way you fought for yourself and made a life when everything seemed impossible." He kissed the top of her head. "I am certainly proud of you." Rose came running up then, her small hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look, Papa, I caught one." "So you did, little love. Now let it go so it can fly free." She opened her hands and they watched the firefly spiral upward into the darkening sky. Thomas came to join them, crawling into his mother's lap even though he was getting too big for it. They sat together as a family, watching the stars emerge one by one, and Zachary felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. This was everything he had never known he wanted. This was home. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They added 2 more children to their family, another son named James, and finally a second daughter named Lily. The house that had once seemed too big for one man now burst at the seams with noise and life. Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's work ethic and his mother's way with animals. Rose became a force of nature, fearless and outspoken, always the first to defend her siblings or any creature she deemed in need of protection. James was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, often found reading in corners or drawing pictures of the desert landscape. Lily, the baby, was everyone's darling, with a sunny disposition that could brighten the darkest day. Zachary taught all his children to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals that depended on them. Delilah taught them to shoot, to read, to think for themselves and stand up for what was right. Together, they raised children who were strong and kind, capable and compassionate. The ranch continued to grow. They added more land, more cattle, better breeding stock for the horses. Delilah's reputation as a horse trainer spread beyond New Mexico territory, and people came from as far away as Texas and Colorado to work with her. Zachary expanded into breeding stock, developing a line of hardy cattle that could thrive in the harsh desert climate. Pinyon grew too, transforming from a small frontier settlement into a proper town with a school, a doctor, and even a small hotel. The New Mexico territory was changing, becoming more civilized, and while part of Zachary mourned the passing of the old ways, he was glad his children would grow up in a safer, more stable world. They heard nothing more of Cyrus Webb over the years. Occasionally word would reach them from California or Nevada, tales of his failed ventures and declining fortune. Zachary felt no satisfaction in the man's downfall, only relief that he was too far away and too preoccupied to ever threaten their family again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Delilah back to the barn where he had first found her. It was late summer again, the same time of year, and the light through the barn door fell at the same angle. "You remember?" he asked, leading her up into the hayloft. "How could I forget?" She looked around at the space that had once been her refuge. "I was so tired I could barely think. All I knew was that I had to find you, that you were my only hope. I fell asleep praying you were the man Thomas believed you to be. And was I?" She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "You were so much more. Zachary, you saved my life that day, not just from Webb, but from a future of fear and loneliness. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up smiling every morning. You gave me everything." You gave me everything, he corrected. Before you, I was just existing, working, surviving, but not really living. You taught me what it means to have someone to share it all with, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the struggles. You made me whole. They kissed there in the hayloft, surrounded by sweet-smelling hay and dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful together. When Thomas, their eldest, turned 18, he announced his intention to start his own ranch on the parcel of land Zachary had been saving for exactly that purpose. It was hard letting go, watching his son ride off to build his own future, but Zachary was proud beyond measure. He had raised a good man, capable and honest, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Rose, true to form, declared she had no interest in marriage and instead wanted to become a veterinarian, a profession almost unheard of for women. But if anyone could break through those barriers, it was Rose. Zachary and Delilah supported her completely, using their savings to send her to school in Denver. James stayed on the ranch, working beside his father and eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. He had a head for business that Zachary lacked, and under his management, the ranch became even more profitable. Lily married a schoolteacher from Santa Fe and moved there, but she visited often with her own growing family. As Zachary and Delilah grew older, their hair turning gray and their bodies moving more slowly, they spent more evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and reminiscing about the years they had shared. They held hands like young lovers, their connection as strong as it had been on the day they married. "You have any regrets?" Delilah asked one evening when they were both in their 50s, their children grown and thriving. Zachary thought about it carefully. "Only that we did not have more time. That the years went by so fast. I wish I could go back and live every moment over again, slower, savoring each one." "Me too," she said softly. "But Zachary, what a life we have lived. What a beautiful, full, amazing life. We started with nothing but hope and love, and look at what we built." He looked around at the ranch, expanded and improved but still recognizably the same place where he had started alone all those years ago. He thought about their children and grandchildren, about the community they were part of, about the difference they had made in so many lives. "We did all right," he agreed. "More than all right. Would you change anything if you could go back?" He turned to look at her, this woman who had walked 50 miles to find him, who had trusted him with her life and her heart, who had been his partner in every sense of the word for over 30 years. "Not a single thing," he said firmly. "Every moment led us here to this life, this family. I would not change a second of it." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars emerged overhead. The desert night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "I love you, Zachary Dalton," Delilah whispered. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." "I love you too, Delilah Dalton, always and always." They sat together under the vast New Mexico sky. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had built a life from nothing but determination and love, who had weathered every storm together and come through stronger for it. They had children who carried on their legacy, grandchildren who would tell their story, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. It was a good life, Zachary thought. The best life. And it had all started with a woman sleeping in his hayloft, exhausted and desperate but brave enough to walk 50 miles for the hope of something better. He had given her safety and security, but she had given him so much more. She had given him purpose, joy, family, love. She had turned his house into a home and his existence into a life worth living. As they finally stood to go inside, arms around each other's waists, Zachary sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For Thomas Sawyer, who had trusted him with his sister's safety. For the day Delilah had walked into his life. For every moment they had shared since then, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. Most of all, he gave thanks for love, the kind that arrives unexpected and changes everything, the kind that grows deeper with every passing year, the kind that makes all the hardship and uncertainty of life worthwhile. Inside the house, they could hear James and his wife putting their children to bed, the sounds of family carrying through the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work to be done, new reasons to be grateful. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. It had always been enough. In the end, their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though it had started that way. It was a story of everyday love, of two people choosing each other again and again, of building something lasting through work and commitment and unwavering devotion. It was a story of finding home in another person's heart. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind where the couple sits together in their old age, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, still holding hands, still in love, still grateful for the day their paths crossed and changed both their lives forever. Zachary Dalton had been a solitary rancher working his land alone. Delilah Sawyer had been a desperate woman fleeing from danger. Together, they had become something neither could have imagined on that hot September morning in 1878. They had become partners, parents, pillars of their community. They had become each other's greatest adventure and safest harbor, and when their grandchildren asked how they had met, Delilah would always smile and say, "I walked 50 miles to find him, and it was worth every step." Zachary would squeeze her hand and add, "Best day of my life when I found her in my hayloft, changed everything." For the better, she would insist. For the better, he would agree, and it was true. Every word of it was true. They lived out their days on that ranch in Pinon, New Mexico, growing old together, watching their family flourish, never taking a single moment for granted. When Zachary eventually passed away at the age of 73, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, his last words were worth it. All of it. "Love you, Delilah." She held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face but no regrets in her heart. They had had 45 years together, years filled with more love than most people experienced in a lifetime. She lived another 5 years after he was gone, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the old days, keeping his memory alive. When she joined him at last, buried beside him in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together, her children found a letter among her belongings. It was addressed to all of them, written in her careful hand. "My darling children," it read. "By the time you read this, I will be gone, reunited with your father in whatever comes next. I want you to know that I have no regrets. Life was hard sometimes, the desert is unforgiving and the work never ends, but I would choose this life again and again. Your father was my great love, my partner in all things, the best man I ever knew. We built something together that will outlast us both, not just this ranch, but a family bound by love and respect and shared values. Take care of each other. Work hard. Love deeply. And remember that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a risk, from walking 50 miles into the unknown because you believe something better is waiting on the other side. Your father was waiting on the other side for me, and together we created all of this. Be proud of where you come from. Be brave in where you are going. And know that wherever we are, your father and I are together, still holding hands, still in love, still grateful for every moment. With all my love forever, Mother." The letter was framed and hung in the ranch house, where it remained for generations, a testament to a love story that started with a desperate flight and ended with a life well lived. The Dalton Ranch continued to operate for over 100 years, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Zachary and Delilah had built. And sometimes, on quiet desert evenings when the light falls just right, ranch hands swear they can see two figures sitting on the old porch, hands clasped, watching the sunset together. Whether it is memory or something more, no one can say. But everyone agrees it is fitting that Zachary and Delilah would never truly leave the place where they had been so happy, where they had built their life together, where their love story had unfolded, because some love stories do not end with death. They echo forward through time, in the children and grandchildren who carry on the legacy, in the land that was tended with care and devotion, in the memories passed down from generation to generation. Zachary and Delilah's story became the foundation myth of their family, the tale told at every gathering, the example held up when times got hard. Remember how it started, they would say. Remember that great-grandmother walked 50 miles to find great-grandfather. Remember that they built this all from nothing but love and hard work. If they could do that, we can do anything. And they were right. Because the greatest legacy Zachary and Delilah left behind was not the ranch or the money or even their direct descendants. It was the belief that love is worth fighting for, that family is built not just by blood but by choice and commitment, that a life of meaning is created through daily devotion to the people and things you care about most. Their story was simple in its essence. A woman in desperate need. A man willing to help. A spark of connection that grew into a flame that warmed them both for the rest of their lives. But in its simplicity lay profound truth about what matters most in life, not wealth or status or ease, but love, partnership, family, purpose. The daily choice to stand beside someone through good times and bad. The commitment to build something together that is greater than what either person could create alone. The courage to trust, to hope, to love even when the future is uncertain and the risks are real. That was the story of Zachary and Delilah Dalton, and it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth aspiring to. Because in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, they had created a pocket of warmth and love and safety. They had made a home, not just a house. They had built a family, not just had children. They had lived a life of meaning and purpose and deep, abiding love. And it had all started with a woman sleeping in a hayloft and a man with a kind heart who decided to help her. Everything else, all the joy and struggle and triumph that followed, grew from that single moment of connection, that choice to extend a hand to someone in need. That was how love stories began sometimes. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with simple kindness. With one person seeing another person's humanity and responding with compassion. With the willingness to take a risk on someone, to trust that they might be worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life beside. Zachary had taken that risk when he gave water to an exhausted stranger in his barn. Delilah had taken that risk when she walked 50 miles based on her brother's word that Zachary Dalton was a good man. They had both taken a risk when they chose to open their hearts to each other, when they married after knowing each other such a short time, when they committed to building a life together despite all the uncertainty. And the risk had paid off beyond their wildest dreams. Because they had found in each other exactly what they needed, a partner, a lover, a friend, someone to share the load and double the joy, someone to face the hardships with and celebrate the triumphs beside. Someone to build a life with, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time. That was their legacy. That was their story. And it ended not with sadness or loss, but with the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. Their children carried on their values. Their ranch continued to prosper. Their love story became legend. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Zachary and Delilah were together still, their hands clasped, their hearts joined, their love eternal. Because some things do not end. Some things transcend time and space and even death itself. Love is one of those things. Real love, true love, the kind that Zachary and Delilah shared, that kind of love never dies. It lives on in memory, in legacy, in the lives it touched and the hearts it changed. It becomes part of the fabric of the universe, woven into the story of what it means to be human, to connect, to care, to commit. Their story was complete. Every thread resolved, every question answered. They had faced their challenges and overcome them. They had built their dream and lived it. They had loved each other with everything they had, every single day of their lives together. And when the end came, they faced it without fear, knowing they had lived well and loved deeply. It was a happy ending in every sense of the word. Not because their lives were easy or perfect, but because they had made them meaningful. Not because they never struggled, but because they struggled together. Not because they never faced hardship, but because the hardship made them stronger and drew them closer. They got there happily ever after, earned through work and commitment and unwavering devotion to each other. They got to grow old together, to see their children thrive, to hold their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They got decades of shared sunsets and morning coffee, of inside jokes and knowing glances, of the kind of deep companionship that only comes from truly knowing and being known by another person. And it all started on a hot September morning in 1878, when Zachary Dalton opened his barn door and found a woman sleeping in his hayloft. A woman who had walked 50 miles to find him. A woman who would become his wife, his partner, his great love. The woman who would change his life forever and give him everything he never knew he wanted. That was their beginning. And their ending was just as perfect. 2 lives well lived, 2 hearts forever joined, 1 love story for the ages. The kind of story that restores faith in happy endings, that reminds us all that love is possible, that partnership is achievable, that building a meaningful life together is the greatest adventure of all. The story of Zachary and Delilah Dalton was complete, and it was beautiful.